Well, welcome to our API Lifecycle. This is part one. This is actually a continuation of the OpenAPI introduction that Joyce and Arnaud did in our last Space Camp session. And we're going to start with some introductions here. So our workshop today is for people that are interested in API development, maybe new to Postman, or maybe you've been using Postman as a testing tool and you want to integrate more of your process. So we're going to show you the full agenda here in just a moment. And as a reminder, this is an intermediate level session. We're going to presume you have some initial knowledge about API development or some basic knowledge about using Postman. If you want to go into more detail of any of these areas, or if you feel we've moved a little too quickly, we encourage you to check out the other Space Camp sessions that we have recorded. And you can also reach out to our community forums as well. So by way of introduction, I'm Ian Douglas. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Postman. I've been in the tech industry for over 26 years, most of that time as a backend developer building APIs of various kinds. I'm a big fan of software testing and technical education.
Hey everyone, I'm Vaishnavi Challa, technical support engineer at Postman. I've been with Postman for a bit more than a year now, and I'm a huge fan of APIs and testing out new features in Postman. So the main points we'll be covering today will be about defining and building an API and how to think about testing. We will not have time to go into details about every step, and some parts of this process may move quickly. Our goal is to give you a process you can follow at a general level within your organization, and you can refine the process as needed within your team. You can watch the recording later to work at your own pace. We're going to show briefly some of the common stages of API development and talk about the API first model. We'll define some operational foundations such as source control and how that will lead us into building an API and using Postman for collaboration. From there, we'll review a quick introduction to OpenAPI. Last month's Space Camp session was a full introduction to OpenAPI, and you can find the recording to go into far more detail. Today, we'll go into generating documentation from OpenAPI specification and how to start building tests. Also, be sure to check out our other Space Camp sessions for more detailed workshops on each of these areas. Today, we'll be bringing all of these pieces together. Our next Space Camp session will be built on today's work. So it also shows you about the monitoring and deploying your API. Okay. Yeah. So by end of this session, we'll learn about API first design and OpenAPI, and then how to import, test, and validate your specifications in Postman.
All right, so before we get started, we'd like to hear a little bit more about everybody attending Space Camp today. So we're going to launch a poll in Zoom, and we're going to ask everyone to share their experience with API design, OpenAPI, and API first, as well as experience with Postman. So take a moment to fill this out for us. You should see this on your screen. So if you can take a moment and just enter a couple of answers for us here, and then we'll share some of the results. So while you're filling this out, we'll just give you a couple of quick reminders again. The session is being recorded. Everyone who signed up for the session will get a link to the recording afterwards, and we'll also publish it online afterward as well. Secondly, again, this is an intermediate level session. So we will ask that you log into your Postman account and create a workspace ready to use, or open an existing workspace that you already have so that you can follow along today. So we'll give everyone a few more moments to fill out that poll for us, and then we'll share some of those results, and we'll see the level of experience that we have for API design, OpenAPI, and overall experience using Postman. And also a reminder again, Arlemy just dropped in chat. Make sure that you look in Zoom. There is a Q&A panel inside of Zoom where you can ask your questions. We have a team of moderators that'll help answer your questions there. And if they don't answer it right away, it might be being saved for Vaishnavi and I to answer at the end in our Q&A section. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share out those results. So you have a few moments left if you want to get those last couple of answers in. All right, most of you have actually answered, so this is great. So we're going to go ahead and share these results. All right, great. So from here, we're going to go into our API lifecycle a little bit and explain a little more about what's going on here. So on the slide here, we see that we've got a lot of different areas of API development, but there's no real starting point or ending point. Development is kind of considered a loop of building, testing, and getting feedback. So it doesn't really matter where you start, whether you start with design or start with security, you can lead from one area into the next. So just for the sake of going around this diagram, we're going to start with define at the top, and we're going to work clockwise around the image. So defining and designing are good ways of getting your development team started with API development. You can craft the design of your API with, say, a governance team to ensure that you have a consistent developer experience across everything that your team produces. This can lead into documentation for your team to get a better sense of what to build, leading to deployment and then testing and so on. When we work all the way through to the discovery section of which portions of our software our users actually use and how they use it, we can start to refine our API definition, and the cycle starts over again. It's also important to note that some teams will work on these things in a different order than what we present here, and that's okay. Maybe your governance team is going to work with data security before you ever get to documentation. Maybe your company does test-driven development and you build out more testing before you deploy your code. The idea of a life cycle, though, is to influence how you build your API, that your company and teams follow the same steps in the same order, so that you follow a common cyclical workflow of defining your work, building your work, getting that feedback, and then repeating that process.
So to recap this, we see that there are many stages of development when building APIs, and there's no one definite starting and ending point. Today, we are going to start with design and testing stages and talk about how Postman can facilitate this within your teams. But before we go into that, let's discuss a little more about the idea of what API first means. So Postman has been promoting API first for a long time. So let's dive into what API first even means. API first is promoting the idea that APIs are of high value to the companies and should be treated as a primary area of developer experience, both inside and outside of your company. There are many APIs in use around the world, connecting the businesses one to another and connecting businesses to consumers, especially in a world that has been seeing a large shift to use of mobile devices. APIs drive a very large amount of commerce in the global cycle, and your API development should be treated as an important part of your business development efforts. Ideally, your team will form a governance group to determine how your API will look and feel to developers using the API. And the design outcome will be standardized across the company. These APIs will then build a foundation for other development, both internal to your company and perhaps externally to partners or consumers. By taking time to produce a strong, reproducible design across your APIs, your developers will need less time adopting and using new APIs and integrate more easily with familiar interfaces. This design can allow you to test out your API model before too much time is spent upon development, reducing the need to rewrites and etc. So the primary goal of this governance is to increase your overall developer experience.
So to recap this, developers will be able to adopt and use your company's APIs, whether they're an internal employee or an external customer, if you spend time standardizing your APIs through a governance team and give a consistent experience to all of your APIs. It goes beyond the API design, of course, into making documentation easy to find, having code samples, and following industry best practices. All right, well, let's get into the main content for today's session. We made a GitHub repository and we've shared an OpenAPI 3.1 specification for a fictitious ice cream store. The link that you see on the slide that you see, and we're going to ask the team to put the link in chat as well. You can follow this link to fork the repository, and we're going to examine this file a little bit in a moment. While you're opening that repository and forking the repo, I'll explain where we're going to go from here. We're not going to go really deep into details on the YAML file itself. Joyce and Arnaud did a fantastic job explaining OpenAPI in our last Basecamp session. You can go find that video to get into the small details of the specification and how it's used, and learn about things like components for repetition and reuse. We're going to import this specification into Postman and show you how you can use this spec to get started on API development and get started on collaboration foundations like GitHub synchronization. You can use this as a starting point to think about your own API design and development. As we just saw, the idea of having your own company standards for how your APIs are designed, built, and documented will have a big impact on developer experience. So I'm going to change my screen here to a code editor where we're going to examine a little bit more about this YAML file. So at the very top here, we see this info block up here at the top. And this information block at the top of the specification can be used to give your users a bit of information about the goal of the API, maybe contact information for help. In this case, we're designing an API for people to order a dessert of some ice cream with toppings like sprinkles. The next section that we see are where the servers of where the API is found. When we're first starting out with API design, though, we don't have anything built yet. So listing a local host server is appropriate to get started. Later on, when your API is in production, you could update this as a list to include a production server as well. From here, we see the sample URI paths of our RESTful API. In our ice cream shop, for example, we have a get endpoint to fetch our menu. And this specification goes into a lot of detail about an example response showing some data. We also see that it's using a component here for our menu inventory that we'll examine a little bit more in a moment. So if I collapse this one and we'll look at our next RESTful endpoint, we see this is a post operation to create an order where a user can give us the ingredients that they want in their dessert. The specification in this case also has an example of what we might send back to the user if they give us some bad data. We can specify a status code and the structure of the data in our response. And this response would also be a good thing to build into a component so that your users have a consistent structure to expect in the case of an error when they're using your API. This might be a common sort of error structure that you might want to send back. Scrolling down just a little bit more, we see a sample request body where we also define the data types that we expect from our users. In this case, we would expect to see an array of objects, and those objects have attributes that use strings and integers. You can define these data types within the specification, and we're going to show you how to validate against this later on. A little bit farther down, we do see our components. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but we see that our data structure is called menu inventory, where we define the data types that we expect. In this case, also an array of objects. And each of those objects has a property of a flavor or a topping name, as well as an integer value. And again, this will be important a little bit later when we get into our testing. So if you do want more context about the overall schema layout, you can go check out our last Basecamp session where Joyce and Arnaud introduced OpenAPI, and they go into a lot more detail about how these components work and so on.
To recap, what we have seen here is an example OpenAPI specification on GitHub, and looked at example paths, responses, and how components can help with reuse in our API design. And I'm excited to see what's next.
Okay, well, I'm going to change my screen from my code editor back to my browser for a moment, and I'm going to ask the team to share one more URL with everyone. And this is a documentation page that we have on Postman that's going to go into a lot more information about API development and this whole workflow within Postman. We certainly can't cover everything in a single session, and so we want to share this link with you. Many people think of Postman as just an API testing tool, but our platform actually allows you to do your entire API lifecycle within the application. So go ahead and bookmark this link and share it with your team. Some areas where Postman can assist with API development include defining your schema, validation, and of course, testing. Building documentation can get your team up and running very quickly, and testing that things are working as expected are all big pieces of the Postman experience. We're going to go into more detail on each of these areas in this session, as well as other Basecamp sessions in the future as well. So next, we're going to import that OpenAPI specification that we just looked at for our ice cream shop into Postman. So I'm going to change from my browser into the Postman application. In this scenario, I'm going to use the desktop application, but you can do your design work in the web application as well. The main difference you might face is that the web application cannot, by default, connect to a local host server. There are ways that you can make that work, but that's outside of the scope of today's session. So to follow along from here, you will need to be logged into your Postman account and in a workspace that you've created. And you'll also need to have forked our repository by now. What we've done is we've already started with a workspace here. We can see the name of it up here is our Space Camp Ice Cream Shop. And so we're going to start over here on the left edge, and we're going to start with the APIs icon. I'm going to hover over it for a moment just so you can see kind of what I'm pointing at on my screen. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new API, and we're going to use the import button here at the top of the interface. From this panel here, we can tell Postman to import a specification from a code repository, which I'm showing here in the interface. And from there, you can select GitHub, at which point you're going to go through an OAuth permission handshake to allow Postman to access your repository list. We'll give everyone a few minutes to go through that step. I need to go through that step myself. We can see in this case, it's warning you, hey, you're leaving Postman. So we're going to go ahead and continue. I've already done the OAuth with GitHub in the past, and so it's going to skip this section for me. But for some of you, you'll get a permission screen saying, do you want to allow Postman to access your repositories and so on. And when you're finished with that, you can close that tab, and we'll go back over to Postman. And back over here in Postman, we can see it's already filled out my name as part of the organization. And from here, I need to select my repository. So I'm going to start typing in the word Space Camp Ice Cream. That's the name of the repository that you forked. And it's going to ask for a branch, and we'll just work on the development branch that was part of that repo. So now we'll click on the continue button down here in the bottom corner of that panel. And then we need to tell Postman that we want to import this as a test suite. So this dropdown right now defaults to documentation, but we actually want to change this to test suite. The reason that we give you this choice is because the application is going to generate a collection of requests for each of the endpoints in our specification and either build out a framework of documentation or start to set up some testing validations. You can always add the other one manually later on, but it's important to know that if you start with a test suite here and then add documentation later, or you start with documentation, you add a test suite later, when you're adding that other section later, it's going to make a whole new copy of all of those requests in another collection. And we do this on purpose so that your documentation team and your development team can work simultaneously on the same version of an API without stepping on each other's toes and breaking each other's work. There's also some advanced settings here. So I'm just going to choose test suite from that dropdown. There are some advanced settings that you can get into if you need to customize how that import happens. And those are options like, looking at indentation styles and so on. We're going to leave all those alone. And we're just going to go ahead and click on this import button down in the bottom corner. All right, a few moments later, we should see that everything was imported successfully. In this case, we see this check mark. It says everything worked out okay. You may have an option here to import the API for private use within your team. You'll probably want to do this if you're going to work on an internal API within Postman, something that's not public facing. For consumers or customers and so on. So we're just going to go ahead and confirm and close this panel. And you can go ahead and close any other confirmation screens that you see. And now we see that we're in our ice cream shop API. We've imported it successfully up here. But all we've done so far is import that specification. We need to do one more step to actually synchronize this with GitHub so that we can push and pull changes and keep that in sync with GitHub. So if we click on the ice cream shop name itself, we're going to click on this here. What we can do now is up in the top right corner, we have a button to connect a repository. And this is going to finish linking this back to GitHub. And it's going to take us through a similar OAuth process that we did a moment ago. So if I click on this button and I click on GitHub, it's going to go through that whole handshake again with fewer permissions this time because you've already granted Postman some permissions. So we're going to say continue, and it should come back right away and say that you've authorized Postman. We can go ahead and close that and come back here. And then we choose some of these options again. Now, in this case, I've got to find my name in my organization, and then it's going to go fetch my list of repositories, and we're going to type in Spacecamp ice cream again. And then it's going to ask for your main branch and your development branch. So we've already made these branches in the repository. So I'm going to choose main for our main branch and development for our development branch. And we're going to leave these other options alone. But if you need to go in and customize this, you can. This is basically when you push this back to GitHub, you can tell it how you want to define your directory structure for pushing the specification back out to GitHub. So we're going to leave those options alone and say connect repository. So now we see a little confirmation down here in the corner that says the GitHub repository has been connected. And we see that that's actually changed up here at the top. We see that now this API is linked over to my repository. So now if we click on the ice cream shop, we see this new folder that dropped down here, and it's just got the word draft. And this draft is just a string representation of what version of the API that we're on. And so I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'm just going to call this like version 1.0. Again, this is just a string identifier. You can name it whatever you like. It's just a string. It doesn't really have any other representation on here. So now if we click on that version, so we'll refer to this as version 1. So if you hear us refer to API version 1, we're generally going to mean like, go ahead and click on version 1 over here. Up here at the top of the interface, we can see that Postman says, hey, this API is in the planning stage. And if we look at the submenu here, we see there are a lot of other options that we could choose, whether we're in development mode, whether it's in production mode, whether it's something that we've deprecated. And again, this is just a label to help with documentation and to help everyone else looking at your API to know what sort of stage this API is in.
Wow, that was pretty easy when we have an OpenAPI specification already built. Importing that into Postman was really fast. Ian, I have a question. What if they don't have an OpenAPI specification? Can they just build a new API from nothing within Postman?
Yep, and I think I saw a question from this earlier in chat. So you can build an API from scratch inside of Postman. You don't have to import anything to get started. Postman right now will not export an OpenAPI spec, but one thing that you can do is as you build up a collection of requests, you can actually export that into an HAR format file, which stands for HTTP archive. And there are tools that you can find that will actually convert that HAR file into an OpenAPI specification.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. So now we can continue to discuss how we can start building tests. Also, why would we start building tests at this stage when we don't even have any server-side code for our API?
Well, it's a good question. So we can use tests that we build here to handle our test-driven development of our API. Even though most of the testing that we do inside of Postman tends to be behavior-driven testing for what we expect our user experience to be, we can still use those tests through our collection runner to help test our development as the team builds out the API. So typically your development team would do their own test-driven development, but Postman just adds another layer of validation that it's matching the specification.
Let's run the validator now. The first thing we'll show on the API screen is how Postman has used the OpenAPI specification to make some of our initial testing suite. We are going to start on the overview tab of our API. Let's click on the test tab in the interface. Here we can see that we have a test suite called Ice Cream Shop that has never been run. And we see a validate button that will check if everything that we imported matches our OpenAPI specification. Yeah, so go ahead and click on the validate button and let's see what happens. Okay, looks like we have issues found. Okay, don't worry, we did this on purpose so that we can show you how to fix some of these errors. So if we click on the issues found marker, we see that we have a choice to run our validation again or review the issues that were found. At a high level, the validator has found a problem within our post operation to create a desert order. it's telling us that request we are trying to send does not match what our specification said we should expect. So if we expand the version 1 on the left, we see that we see the collection of requests that Postman imported. So let's go and take a look at the post request to see what happened. Then we look at the body of the request. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. When we look at the body of the outgoing request, we can start to figure out why our validator was wrong. In this case, the input tool made that array of objects that Ian showed earlier, but we see that the actual structure here has a string for all the count attribute values where we actually expect a numeric like 5. So we could fix all of this manually, but we can also fix this from the validator. So let's go back to that screen in the tab at the top of the interface. On this screen, we can expand the post operation, and we can see that Postman is trying to suggest some randomized data. Unfortunately, though, it seems that Postman doesn't understand very much about tasty desserts or limitations of our inventory to know we cannot have negative inventory like this, but we're going to accept these changes for now. Since this is the only problem the validator found, we can select the select all changes checkbox at the top of the interface and click on the confirm changes to collection button. Then we click on the final button here to view our updated collection.
Well, this one's taking a moment. We might need a moment here. But go ahead and explain what we can expect to see here.
Yeah, we expect to see a final button which says that collection is completely updated with these changes. So let's wait for a moment for that. Oops.
No, it looks like it hasn't quite finished yet.
Yeah,
Still working on that.
Okay.
Basically, what it would be doing here behind the scenes is it's actually updating the post body. It's actually going to go change our post operation here to actually fill in some numeric data here. At which point it's going to rerun the validation for us automatically. And then we'll see that the validator would actually update here to let us know that, that everything worked out okay. So I'm just going to close this tab and we'll start that again. And we'll select all those changes and confirm. Looks like we might be running into a bit of an issue here, but we can carry on from here. If this does take some time, we'll just go ahead and move forward from here. So basically what we'd be seeing here is that when this finishes implementing that change, it's going to update that post body for us. We would see the validator would actually change to say that there were now no issues found. And you can always come back and click on this at any time to run that validator again. Until this actually works within Postman, it's going to come up and say these issues are found. But for now, we can get past this and continue to move on.
Yeah, Ian, we have a suggestion from the chat to close the post tab and then retry.
Yep, let's try that. So let's not save that. And let's go back to the validator. And we'll try this again. No, it's still taking a moment to think about that. So we'll just continue on from here. So yeah, go ahead, Vaishnavi.
So yeah, it is expected, as Ian told, it's expected that we get changes updated to the collection. And we can go back to our version 1 and click again on the test tab. And if the changes are updated, then we'll see that our validation has already evaluated everything again and no issues were found. So if we find that, and if we click on the new issues found, we can see how to run the validator again in the future. So next to the indicator where this no issues is found, we see that there is a run test button that will start to test we use the collection test runner that you might be familiar with, and we haven't added any test code to our API yet, so we won't be able to actually run anything yet. In fact, if we try, we should see an error in our console that we cannot connect to the localhost.
Yeah. So if we were to actually try and run the collection runner here, it's gonna fail. So let's go fix that localhost issue first. This will kind of, and we'll also recap what we just did here. So we've imported our API specification as a test suite, and then Postman has set up some validation automatically for us that will check what got imported and test that against our validations to see that the structure of all of our request endpoints and what the user might be sending over actually matches what we want our API to conform to. In this case, we introduced an error in the specification file for the purpose of the training today so that you could see how to run the validator. As your team develops the API from here, you can go back and run that validator as many times as you need to. So in our OpenAPI spec, remember we had a place to define those servers, and we had listed a localhost server, but since we don't have any code running, we can't access that to run any of our requests or our tests. So as part of the collaboration that your team might do, teams might set up environments for like development work, QA, testing team, maybe a staging server, and maybe a production server. So if we open the request to fetch our current inventory menu, we'll see that Postman has a collection variable for us already called base URL. This is currently stored in a collection variable. We can see the scope of it here, but that's not going to be very helpful for us if we want to use different environments. So what we're going to do is we're going to go build a development environment, and we're going to move this value out of our collection variables. So we're going to start by clicking on environments over here on the left side, and then we're going to click on the plus sign up here at the top to create a new environment, and we're just going to call this development for now. Cool. Vaishnavi, do you want to walk us through from here?
Yeah, sure. So we'll add a variable here with the same name, and the case sensitivity must match exactly. And what we'll type in here is the word base, all lowercase, and then an uppercase letter U, and the letters R and L in the lowercase after that. For the sake of today's training, we'll leave the variable type to default and set our initial value to the local host with port 3000, as we saw earlier. This will automatically set the current value as well. We'll save our work, and then we are going to, we'll save the work, and then we're going to remove the collection variable. Let's go back to our API and click on our version 1 and click on the ice cream shop collection. Under that, and next we'll look at the collection variables by clicking on the variables tab. We'll find our base URL variable here and remove it by hovering over the row and clicking on the cross icon on the right edge. We'll save our work again and go back to our get menu request. If we hover over the base URL variable now, we see that it's unresolved. We need to pick our environment from the top right corner. From here, we can select our development environment. And now when we hover over the base URL, we see the variable is resolved. This will not help us run our test though, since we don't have an API server running anywhere. So what we do have from our OpenAPI specification were some examples of responses. We can use those saved responses to create a mock server in Postman, and from there we can write some tests. So let's click back on the ice cream shop collection under the version 1 of our API, and when we hover over, we see the 3 dots appear. If we click on that, we can select the mock collection from the submenu. we need to give it a name. So let's use something simple like V1 mock server for now. Click on the create mock server and we are done. The page we see here shows us the URL of the mock server, but Postman has also made another environment for us with this value saved already. So let's check that out. If we click on the environments, we see our V1 mock server, but the variable name is only called the URL by default. And we need to change it to base URL to match our case. So like in our other environment. So we need to update that and save the change. Now, if we go back to our API again and click on the version 1 and click on the test, the version 1. Yeah, and get back to our test suite. Make sure our environment is set to our mock server and click on the run test button to start up our collection running. And we see that the requests were called, but we have no test codes yet.
Okay, so we did a little bit there. Let's review what we did. So we started out by making a development environment and moving our base URL variable from our collection into our environment, so we can continue to build out other environments and have an easy way to swap our host name during development, testing, and production, and so on. From there, we made a mock server using the saved examples that were generated when we imported that OpenAPI spec. Now, that only worked because our specification had examples in it already. If you create a spec that doesn't have examples, you're going to need to make your own examples and save those as responses before you can make a mock server. All right, well, I think it's time to write some test code, and many of you are already going to be familiar with this. So we're going to have the team share a link to the Postman Space Camp webpage, where you can find previous recordings, including our introduction to testing session. We're not going to go into a lot of deep detail here on testing. We're just going to show you how to get started. So many of you will be used to adding test code through the collections icon over here on the left side. The nice thing about the import that we did is it created a collection for us that will actually synchronize back and forth between the API section and the collections section. So as you add or remove test code or even other folders or requests, all of that work is going to synchronize here between the collections area and the APIs area. So you won't need to repeat any of the work that you do. So for the next part, it won't matter whether you're on the collections section or whether you're on the API section. I'm going to be staying within the API section of the application myself, but everything else is going to work exactly the same way. So we can add tests to our collection by choosing an endpoint. So in this case, I'm going to choose our fetch endpoint and see that we still have the same pre-request script and test areas that you've probably already used in Postman. So for the sake of time today, I'm just going to show some of the more common code snippets that Postman can generate to get some successful responses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one test each for our get and our post operation and just expect a successful status back from this. So I've started by clicking on my fetch on my get endpoint. I'm going to go into the test tab, and I'm going to look for a snippet down here that just looks for a status code 200. So we want to look for the snippet that says status code is 200. When we click on that, it's going to import that code for us automatically. And then we'll go ahead and we'll save that work. If I do try to send this over, we'll see that it actually does hit the mock server, and we can see that the test actually passed. So we're going to go do the same thing for our post operation. So I'm going to click on the post operation. I'm going to click on the test tab over here. Now, I'm going to choose a slightly different snippet here. There's one, if you go down just a little bit further, there's one called status code successful post request. And this is going to check for either a 201 or a 202 status code, which would typically come back from a post operation. So I'm going to send that over, make sure that that works. In that case, this one failed. So we'll go ahead and save this work, but let's go see why this failed. So if you remember when the validator ran earlier, it was creating an outgoing post that had those randomized values. So we're going to go update our body over here. We can see that the validator actually got around to updating those values for us. So let's go see what we're actually dealing with. So the validator told us that the data was formatted. The issue here is that the saved example that we have is different. So remember that the mock server is not a real server. It can't interpret incoming data. When we're actually sending this post operation over, the mock server is trying to do its best to match the request URL, the HTTP method, as well as the parameters that you're sending over and try to match on those. In this case, it's not going to do any sort of matching on the body itself. And so we've got a little bit of custom work here to get the mock server up and running. So for the sake of time, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by taking the body of our success. So I clicked on our success example and I clicked on body, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to copy all of this. And I'm going to paste this into the body of our actual post operation. So we're going to get rid of the sort of the string and those randomized integer values, and we're just going to save this in here. But that's not enough to make the mock server work, because again, the mock server is only looking at the method, the URL, and the parameters. We need to tell it to also consider the body of what we're sending in our post operation. So we need to add a new header here. So we're going to go into headers, and what we're going to do on our headers here is we need to actually remove these two. These got imported from the specification. So the first thing we're going to do is remove these two headers. But we do need to add another header in here called x mock match request body. And we need to set this to a true value. This is going to tell our mock server when we send this over, like, hey, like make sure that you're also matching the request body. So that's all we need to do from that post operation. But in order to actually match this, we actually need to do one more change in here. So we need to go into the headers of the examples themselves, and we need to add a new header in here that says that this is coming back as application JSON. So what we're going to do here in the example, and we need to do this for both of our examples, is we need to add a new header where that key is just going to be our content type. And we're going to set that value to application JSON. And we need to add this again to both of our examples. So I'm going to save this example and go do this for our next example. We're going to add this in here, and this will be content type.
And it's in params. It's in the params.
Say that again. Sorry.
Like you have added in the params.
Oh, you're right. I'm in the param section. Yep. Thank you. So let me go remove that. Make sure you're on the headers block. And then we want content type and application. Oops. So I'm going to save that one, make sure. Yeah, so this one was on the headers. This one's also on our headers. The nice thing about this is as soon as we save this, the Postman mock server is going to start updating right away. So because we've copied over the body from our successful example, if we try to send this post operation over now, we see that we get the 201 and we see that we get back our example response. If we were to go in here and find the body of what's not going to work. So for example, if we want to look for, say, a lemon flavor of ice cream with a topping of, I don't know, raspberries. If we saved this, if we were to copy this body over into our post body, then we should get back our 400 request. Now, if we try to send anything else in here, what's another ice cream flavor? Vaishnavi, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Chocolate.
What kind?
Chocolate.
Chocolate?
That's my,
okay.
Yeah.
So anything that doesn't exactly match this request body, if we try to send this over, we actually get a message back from our mock server saying, hey, we don't have a match for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I think we've covered enough of like getting started with the testing with the mock servers.
Also remember that it may take some time for the mock server to update. So if it doesn't succeed right away, like you just try again in a few minutes.
Yeah.
And Postman was initially created as a testing tool for APIs, and that's still a popular way to how people use the application. But now Postman does so much more. We showed you how to add code snippets and you can review our previous Space Camp recordings online for more detail on how to build tests in JavaScript using the chai library. The API area of Postman will also allow us to double check that everything we do in developing our API will conform to our documented standards from our specification, and even make suggestions on changes based on the data types we define in the schema. Since our API is linked to GitHub, we could start push details and updates back to the GitHub and vice versa. So that concludes the learning for today's session. We'd like to share some additional learning resources with you and move into the Q&A.
So we're going to share these links in Zoom chat as well. So if our moderators can help us out and post these links in chat for us, that would be a big help. Thank you. Vaishnavi, do you want to talk about these resources and what they are?
Yeah, sure. So our team will add these links in Zoom chat for you. The first link we are going to share with you is a link to our other Space Camp sessions. This page will show you upcoming sessions and previous recordings as well. And our session next month will continue where we have left off here, where Ruby and Arlemy will show us how to take the ice cream shop API, add monitoring to it, and look at the deployment strategies. I'm quite excited for that. If you haven't already registered for the same, please do that today. The next link is our 30 days of Postman. We encourage everyone to walk through this challenge to see more of the features available within Postman. This is my personal favorite because it has all the hands-on to all the features. The next link is a community forum. If our team didn't answer your question in the chat today and we don't get to it in our Q&A in a moment, unfortunately, please go to our community forum and ask your question there. It's a really vibrant forum and we have a lot of useful information and many people who are eager to help you. Finally, we would like to share a workspace of frequently asked questions that we often get about Postman. If you're not as familiar with Postman or feel stuck on a particular area, there might be some documentation and examples there to help you out.
Okay, so let's recap our learning objectives and what we went over today. So we shared some ideas about API first design and kind of reinforced OpenAPI. We imported that API specification into Postman. We showed you the validator, at least part of it. And we showed you how to start writing some tests and also get a mock server up and running to start building out that API based on your design. Cool. All right. So from here, we're going to go into our Q&A section. We do appreciate the questions and again, appreciate the moderators for helping us there as well. We do have a feedback form that we'd like everyone to fill out as well. If someone could please drop this in chat as well. We do take our feedback very seriously about Space Camp, ways that we can improve and things that we can explain better. And we're also going to be starting some in-person Space Camp in the future. And so we use all of your feedback here. So please take a few moments. There are only a couple of questions on this survey. We'd appreciate hearing from you. And we do read every response that you send in. Okay, so from here, we're going to go into Q&A. And again, we do appreciate the questions. Our moderators did save a couple of questions for us. So I'm going to get started with this first one. So we had a question from Sankara saying, I develop APIs using Java and Spring Boot. If I go API first, there are some Maven plugins available to generate a stub to kickstart my development. But once I have a live project, how can I still go API first and generate the stubs that automate the delta of changes I made to the OpenAPI YAML? So there are a couple of options here. So either the plugin that you're using is able to detect the delta in the spec and generate what's missing, or it generates the whole thing. But your code repository is going to be able to sort of show you that delta. And so it will come down to a little bit of careful planning. I don't know that there's going to be an easy way to automate, hey, I've already done this, just go import what's left. You might be able to automate that with some scripting. I would probably be checking for some open source tooling around that. There's a whole website. It's called, I believe it's openapi.tools as a website. There's a large number of tools on there for generating OpenAPI specs, as well as working with like the HTTP archive and so on. So I'd probably check out openapi.tools as a website and see whether there's something there that could help. But I'd probably be looking for some sort of automation around detecting which endpoints have already been done and which ones still need to be improved.
Yeah, there is a question from Alan. Is there a best practice for operationalizing, keeping both the collection and OpenAPI specification in sync? Alan, once you have an OpenAPI specification, you can generate a collection from it. And then we keep on updating it as the OpenAPI gets updated. Like you can validate it against it. As we saw today, we see that there is a bit of issue with that, and the team is currently looking on it. The validation, the update endpoint is having some issue. So it actually works as the collection will be validated against the OpenAPI specification that we import. So I'll be pasting a link in chat where you can find.
Arlemy just pasted it in there. So, so anyone else curious, you can go check out that link that Arlemy just dropped in chat.
Thanks, Arlemy.
Cool. Looks like we had an anonymous question come in. When working on the same API and workspace as others, how do you ensure that the tests that one person is writing doesn't affect another person's tests? So Postman does allow setting roles and permissions from starting at the basic tier upwards. So you'll be able to give specific permissions to make sure that people aren't stepping on each other's work. You can also go in and you can make forks of your own collections. And so everyone on the team can fork the collection and do their own work. And then you can actually merge those changes back up the chain, all within Postman. So it works a little bit similar to a code repository where if Vaishnavi and I both want to work on something at the same time, we can each make a fork, we each do our own development, and then we can merge that work back. And just like a code repository, you might have something equivalent to a merge conflict that you have to resolve, at which point you can communicate as a team for how you want to resolve that. And so I would start with that as well. So once you import that OpenAPI spec, it'll build the collection. From there, other members of your team individually could fork those collections, do their individual work, and then merge that back. And then again, as we saw, because we synchronized that with GitHub, we can actually grab that specification and push it back to GitHub if you want that to be your source of truth. Cool. I think we got time for one last question, Vaishnavi, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, sure. Question from Tev, if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm sorry. So is there an easy way to use the post responses defined in the YAML as a part of tests or mock server without copy paste and maintaining that? Unfortunately, it is not supported at the moment. The examples defined in the API definition will be automatically added to a mock server, but we do not make them available directly in tests just yet. So it is still a bit of copy pasting. And like if you come across any feature and you can actually explain us how it benefits you by submitting a feature request in our GitHub. I've pasted a link of how to submit a feature request to us. Our product managers prioritize, like we actually track all the feature requests in our GitHub repository, and you can actually submit a feature request there.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for attending today. Go please register for the next session. It's going to build off of the work that we've started today. Arlemy and Ruby are going to be taking this API now, and they're going to show you how to actually deploy it and add monitoring as well. So you can go register for that. Otherwise, thank you for your time. We'll get this recording out to everybody soon. And we appreciate you coming by our Space Camp session today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.